guys, Caleb Giddings here from Gun Nuts Media, and today's live stream we are going to be doing two things. First thing, we're going to be discussing the recent, honestly tragic events in Florida that cost a man his life and have now cost another man his freedom. Obviously the Florida parking lot shooting is what we're going to be talking about. And then hopefully, if time permits, I'll be able to take some viewer questions about whatever you guys want to talk about, because I do love the viewer interactions. It's one of my favorite parts of doing live streams. So anyway, let's talk about the Florida parking lot shooting. Let's get it started. Right off the bat, we have to establish some facts here. So here are the 10,000 foot view facts. All right, a man shot another man. The man who was shot died, and now the man who did the shooting has been arrested and is being charged with manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, down here in Florida. And we'll get into why that's relevant as well here in a couple of minutes. But what I want to do first is I want to actually go and kind of rebuild the scene of what happened, because there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of bad information out there. And if you haven't seen the video, I recommend you do. Go Google it. It's readily available online. There's a million different places that you can go see this video of what happened in this parking lot. But to set the scene, and I'm not going to give you any backstory on any of the people that were involved with it, because I don't want you to be prejudiced against them. All right. So to set the scene, a vehicle pulls into a handicapped parking space outside of a store. The shooter goes out and begins to speak to the woman in the vehicle who had parked illegally in this handicapped space. This is a verbal confrontation. Whether or not he yells or screams is immaterial. He goes out to confront this woman in her parking space, all right, or in the handicapped parking space, I should say. So this goes on for a minute, and then the woman's partner / boyfriend / husband, I believe the decedent was the boyfriend of the woman in the vehicle. He comes out behind the trigger puller and sees this guy screaming at his girlfriend, or shouting at his girlfriend, or verbally confronting his girlfriend, at which point he proceeds to push this man down onto the ground. Full stop. Pushed him. He didn't throw him. He didn't do a ninja flip or anything like that. He shoved him roughly down to the ground. All right, so that is a level of force. That is a level of force right there that was used. However, all right, we're gonna keep going. All right, so he shoves him down on the ground. At which point the shooter produces a handgun, draws it out, aims in, and shoots the guy who shoved him. Shoots the decedent, who proceeds to expire. Obviously, here are the issues here. All right. The first issue is, when you watch the video, it appears to my eye, to the eyes of many other experienced professionals in the personal defense, in military, and in law enforcement, that the decedent, when he saw the handgun, began to retreat. He very clearly takes a step backward on the video before the shooter fires. All right. It looks really bad on the video. It looks like he was trying to retreat and then got shot in the chest, okay? So that's relevant. The shooter is claiming self-defense under Florida's stand your ground law, which I don't believe applies in this case. And I actually believe that the shooter was in the wrong, that this was an unjustifiable, that the shooter was wrong, that this was an unjustifiable shooting, and that the shooter and that voluntary manslaughter is an appropriate charge. I don't think that this shooting rises to the legal level necessary to be charged with to be charged with second-degree murder or capital murder, because I don't believe this shooter had any intention to go out and kill that man that day, obviously. But it does rise to the legal level of voluntary manslaughter, which in Florida is an act where you kill somebody and you do it because an incident happened where you were essentially provoked into a fit of rage. You can Google the statutes on voluntary manslaughter in Florida, and I think it very neatly fits as a charge for this event. So, now let's get into the weeds here with this event, all right? What went wrong? A lot of things went wrong. This shooting was a completely avoidable loss of life, all right? So first off, we have the loss of life of a human being who didn't deserve to die that day, all right? He didn't deserve to die that day. And secondly, we have the fact that the shooter's life is going to be destroyed. He's going to have to endure a costly trial. He may have to endure even if he is acquitted, which I don't believe he should be or will be, even if he is acquitted, he'll have to endure a civil trial after that. He will be financially destroyed. He will be emotionally devastated. His life is ruined as a result of his absolute inability to avoid a life-threatening situation, all right, or avoid inserting himself into someone else's life-threatening situation. Because what we want to do, here's some things I don't care about. I don't care about the races of anybody involved because it's not germane to this discussion. I don't care about the political backgrounds or the criminal backgrounds of anyone involved because it's not germane to this discussion. What is germane and what we can look at are the shooter's actions and his failure to understand what a lawful use of force is. So one of the things that I do is I teach use of force classes, all right? I teach when a use of force is lawful, when a use of force isn't lawful. This is something that I do at least once a month. And it's a good class. It's one of my favorite things that I get to teach. And we're not going to go too far into the weeds on this, but to understand, for deadly force to be justified, the person that you use that force against, and this is in very broad terms here, the person that you use that force must have the ability, the opportunity, and the intent to cause you or someone else death or grievous bodily harm. Okay? Ability, opportunity, and intent, all right, to cause you or someone else death or grievous bodily harm. So here's a hypothetical example of a case that would meet all three of those, all right? If I am walking my dog at night and someone pops out of an alleyway with a knife and says, "Give me your wallet or I'll fucking murder you," and that person is within, call it, 7 yards of me. I wonder why I picked 7 yards. And that person pops out of the alley with a knife and says, "Give me your wallet or I'll fucking murder you," and he's within 7 yards of me. He has the ability, because he has a knife. He has the opportunity, because he is close enough to cover that distance in between us with that knife and stab the living crap out of me. And he's clearly demonstrated the intent. Now, obviously, that's a school book definition of it, because that was constructed to meet all of those criteria. So now let's apply that to the parking lot shooter. All right, the person threw him on the ground. All right, so you could make the argument that due to the decedent's, the dead guy's physical size, he had the ability to physically to inflict grievous bodily harm or death on the shooter. You could make the argument that he could do that. Where that completely breaks down is both opportunity and intent. All right, in the video, and again, all we have to go with is the video, and unfortunately, all we have to go with is the video and the word of the guy who pulled the trigger, because the other guy is dead and he can't speak for himself. So you would have a very hard time convincing me, or and I think any rational person, that he had opportunity and intent. Maybe opportunity, because he was very close. But after he threw the shooter on the ground, he started to back off. To me, to a reasonable person, I believe that attempt to retreat on the part of the decedent very clearly illustrates a lack of opportunity and intent. All right, he didn't want to beat the hell out of the shooter. He just wanted the guy to stop verbally confronting his girlfriend, and so he shoved him on the ground and began to retreat. Much to his surprise, he got a bullet in the chest for his trouble. It's unfortunate, it really is. So just right there on the face of things, I don't believe that this use of deadly force meets the 3 necessary criteria for deadly force. I don't see it. I maybe see ability, but I don't see opportunity or intent. And if you would like to try to convince me, feel free to try to do so in the comments of this video. Now let's look at the shooter's actions, and let's look at failure points in the shooter's actions. And this is where the background of the shooter becomes relevant. So this, oh, that's good coffee. Hey, you guys got to get on that cold brew coffee life, all right? If you're not making your coffee using the Toddy Coffee cold brew system, you need to get your life together. That's not a paid endorsement. I would take money from them if they wanted to give it to me. I 100% would. Like, if they, like, Toddy Coffee, sponsor me. Love you. Anyway, back to the video. Let's look at the shooter's actions, all right? This is where background becomes important, because this was not the first time that the shooter had harangued someone over parking illegally in a handicapped spot. But he had no legal authority to do this. He was basically the self-appointed parking lot protector. And that's weird. That's a super duper weird thing for a person to want to do. But, okay. So the first failure point here, and the first thing that I would say don't do, is don't go looking for trouble, all right? Don't confront people in parking lots about them illegally parking in a handicap space. If you really, really care about it, like if you care so much about that sort of thing, call the police. That's literally their job, to enforce the laws. Now, there's a whole nother, conversation that we can have about whether or not that's worth calling the police, and that's fine, we can do that later. But don't go looking for fucking trouble, all right? It's not worth it. It's not worth the potential fallout, as is very clearly evidenced in this situation, all right? So, step 1, first failure point that this guy had. He went looking for trouble. He was obviously very interested in inserting himself into these situations for the purpose of creating a confrontation. He was very interested in creating confrontation because he'd done this before, he'd done it in the past, and he would probably going to keep doing it if this one hadn't turned out the way it did. So, that's failure point number 1. His second failure point was, and I'm not going to fault him for not de-escalating the situation, because he created the situation, all right? Normally, I would fault someone if they get dragged into a situation of someone else's creation and they fail to de-escalate it. But in this guy's case, because he started it, I'm not going to fault him for not de-escalating it, because I've already faulted him for starting it. Does that make sense, if you're tracking that? All right, so anyway, because this guy started it, where I will fault him next, though, is not having any options aside from a gun. When the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and when you're only training with self-defense and the use of force and the use of violence is a gun, that's what you're going to default to when you get into a situation, all right? If this guy hadn't had a gun, what do you think would have happened? Probably nothing. Honestly, probably nothing. Did the level of force that the dead man used on the shooter rise to the necessary level of force to make it justified for the shooter to have pepper sprayed this guy? Oh, hell yes. Absolutely, hell yes. 100% unequivocally yes. And this, sorry, I'm getting a little bit worked up here, is one of the things that actually really gets me is that he could have, I'm messing with the chat settings while I talk to you guys. All right. He absolutely, yeah, he was shoved hard blindside, but that doesn't rise to the level of force necessary to use deadly force. All right. I've been shoved too, and I didn't ever think that killing the person who shoved me was the appropriate response. But absolutely, it rose to the level of force necessary to justify pepper spraying him. And if this guy had fallen on the ground and whipped out a can of Saber or Fox and had stood up and blasted this guy in the face and said, "Get back, get back," that that would have been a perfectly justifiable use of force. And I'm going to address something here for a second. The guy who shoved the shooter to the ground did not have any right to assault him, all right? Assault is illegal, all right? Shoving the shooter on the ground was illegal, and it was wrong. No one is saying that he was right to do that. The guy who's dead obviously could have come out and said, "Hey, please stop shouting at my girlfriend." He could have 100% tried to de-escalate the situation, and yes, he failed to do that, but he didn't do anything that he deserved to die over that day. And that's the point that I'm trying to get at here, all right? Just because what someone did is wrong doesn't mean that deadly force is an appropriate level of force to respond to it. That is, if there's nothing else that you guys take away from this video, it's that deadly force is not always the right answer. Less than lethal force is sometimes the right answer, and something to bear in mind is pepper spray is a lower level of force than punching someone. All right, nobody's ever died from getting pepper sprayed unless they went into like cardiac arrest from the shock or something like that. But if the shooter had that as a force option, we wouldn't even be talking about this. It wouldn't even have made the news. The police wouldn't have arrested anyone. They would have been like, well, don't shove people and you won't get pepper sprayed. And don't go looking for confrontations in parking lots and you won't get shoved to the ground. Hominis dominus, go with God. And that would have been the end of it. And that's why the drive of this video is you need to have more options than just a gun, all right? There are 2 salient points that we're trying to make here. Don't go looking for trouble and have options other than just a gun. If you're not carrying pepper spray, you really should be. You should get a trainer, learn how to use the inert spray so that you don't accidentally spray yourself, and then carry pepper spray, all right? It works 90% of the time. It actually probably works even more than that. Pepper spray is amazing stuff. It works great. Nobody likes getting pepper sprayed, all right? And if the shooter had not gone to a gun, if he had, grabbed his pepper spray and just hosed that guy down from his back and then hopped up and been like, "I'm calling the police, you assaulted me," end of story. Nobody's dead. Yeah, I disagree that the shooter was going to get his face kicked in, because you can't know what the guy who threw him on the ground was going to do. The video, which is the only evidence we have, indicates that the guy who got shot was attempting to retreat. He threw the guy on the ground and then he took a step back. You could make the argument that he was going to further attack the shooter, but I don't buy it. It doesn't match his body language, it doesn't match his movements, and additionally, what if he just wanted the guy to stop yelling at his girlfriend? We don't know. We don't know. And this is the other thing that's important to think about here, all right? The shooter is going to have the opportunity to make his case that he was afraid for his life. That's what he got arrested. He's been charged with voluntary manslaughter, and he is going to have his day in court. Personally, I don't want to ever have a day in court. That's expensive. That's terrible, all right? If I can carry a less lethal option and hose somebody down with pepper spray. And look, here's some real talk, all right? If he had hosed that dude down with pepper spray and then that dude had kept advancing through the spray, now you have a way to justify that eventual shooting. I sprayed him, I gave him a verbal command to stop, he kept advancing, I was afraid for my life. I'm not saying that's an open and shut self-defense case, but it's a lot better than, oh yeah, I shot him as he was backing away, because that's what it looks like happened, all right? It looks like he shot that man as that man was backing away from him. And that's going to be very, very difficult to prove that that was a legitimate act of self-defense, all right? It's going to be very difficult, and again, I'm going back to this. It's going to be very difficult to prove that that man had the opportunity and the intent, especially the intent, to do grievous bodily harm to the shooter. So our 2 points today: don't go looking for trouble, all right? Don't be the self-appointed parking lot police. Don't be the self-appointed neighborhood watch guy. And no, all right, so no, if the shooter hadn't been harmed, like if he hadn't been thrown to the ground, he had still shot that guy, he should have been arrested for that too. I'm not sure what you're trying to get at with the question. Here's a big problem with the way people are looking at or the way people are looking at this, because there's been a couple of comments about this. You have to remove the wrongness of the dead person's actions from your thought process when examining this, okay? Was it wrong that the dead guy pushed the shooter to the ground? Yes. That's the end of that. And the reason that's the end of it is because you have to be able to take that out of the equation and look at whether or not shooting somebody in this circumstance after you've been pushed to the ground and not sustained a serious injury, because he hadn't, okay? The shooter had been pushed to the ground, he had not sustained a serious injury, he was not immediately in danger, right? The guy who pushed him was taking a step back and attempting to retreat when he was shot, all right? There's nothing in the video that suggests that the shooter was in immediate danger of death or grievous bodily harm. And regardless of getting shoved, it doesn't appear to meet the standards for the use of deadly force. It doesn't. And I would be saying this if the situation was exactly the same, if it was a young, fit CrossFitter or a cop or anything like that. This did not appear to be an appropriate use of deadly force to my eye and to the eyes of many trained professionals, all right? So point number 1, don't go looking for trouble. That's an interesting question. All right, so we're going to go into the Q&A phase here real quick. Bob Hamilton has a very interesting question. We're going to go into the Q&A phase of this, and we'll take questions about stuff other than the Florida parking lot cheating as well, so whatever you've got. But real first, our points. Don't go looking for trouble, all right? You're not a hero, and the world doesn't want you to be one. And secondly, have options. Have options other than a gun. Carry pepper spray. I'm not a big fan of tasers, but I am a big fan of pepper spray. So have an option that doesn't involve deadly force. Now, Bob Hamilton in the comments asked a very interesting question. Would the shooter have been justified to brandish his gun and not fire it? Generally speaking, I am opposed to private citizens threatening people with guns in situations where they're not legally justified to shoot that person. And the big problem with this is that introducing a gun to any confrontation legally counts as deadly force. All right, you are introducing the threat of deadly force to this situation now. And I don't want to be the guy who introduces deadly force into a situation where it wasn't previously justified. I'm also not a big fan of bluffing with handguns, because that's what that would have been. It would have been a bluff. He's not willing to shoot this person, or, well, obviously he was willing to shoot this person. He shouldn't have been willing to shoot that person, And so bluffing with a handgun just never seems like a good idea to me. That's one that you could quarterback back and forth for a while. Do I think it might have worked? Honestly, I think based on what the video shows, I think that brandishing the handgun was working. The guy saw the handgun and began to retreat and then got killed for his trouble. So, I'm not a big fan of drawing handguns and pointing them at people when you're not legally justified to shoot that person. But it may be an effective tactic. But again, you have to understand that the minute you produce a handgun, you have introduced the threat of deadly force to that situation. All right. So if it's not a situation that, all right, you know what? I'm going to make a blanket statement. If you are not in a situation that warrants a threat of deadly force, don't draw your gun. All right. I don't think it's a good idea, and I think that you should have options other than deadly force that you can use to reduce or otherwise mitigate dangerous situations. All right, we'll take a couple more questions if anybody wants to ask stuff, but that is probably about it. We're at about half an hour for this. All right, question for you. Revolver in 9mm is looking appealing, like an LCR in 9mm for concealed carry. I love the idea of a 9mm revolver. What I don't love, and what I have never loved, is the execution that you get on moon clips in compact carry guns. All right, so compact revolvers for concealed carry, the moon clips are almost always garbage, and they bend really easily. And if you get a bent moon clip in your gun and pull that trigger, it's going to be a real bad trigger pull. All right, so we did get a question that was, how do I know that the shooter wasn't in fear for his life? I don't. The shooter is going to have the opportunity to make his case that he was in fear for his life. However, and this is something that people get wrong, just being afraid for your life is not sufficient justification to shoot somebody. I've been afraid for my life in Miami traffic a lot, and I haven't shot anybody as a result of it. So just being afraid for your life is not, and tattoo this on the back of your eyeballs, being afraid for your life is not justification by itself to use deadly force. Okay? People need to understand that. You need other things to be present as well. You have to have, the person that you kill has to have ability, opportunity, and intent to kill you or do grievous bodily harm to you. All right? Those need to be there. That's not a negotiable thing. Okay? Back to revolvers here real quick. So the problem, again, when you get those tiny moon clip revolvers, they end up bending quite a bit, and they bend very easily, and sometimes the bend is imperceptible, and then you load it into your gun and you get two really good trigger pulls, and then you get a third trigger pull that's 800 pounds because it's trying to advance that slightly higher cartridge case past the high spot, and it doesn't work well. For defensive revolvers, I really like the Ruger LCRs in 38 Special, and I really like the Smith & Wesson 351 PD in 22 Magnum. It is a great little gun. I carry one regularly because it's lighter. It's lighter than this knife, and that's really hard to find in a carry in a carry gun. All right, that is it. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. I appreciate you guys watching. We will be back on Thursday with not a live stream. I'm going to do these Tuesday live streams as regularly as possible as my training schedule permits. All right, everybody, thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely day, and remember, until next time, run your gun, not your mouth.